Hello and welcome. I am going to walk you through doing our tutorial for Microsoft Project Exercise A, New Wine Brand. This is our introduction and setup. I'm opening up Microsoft Project 2013. As it loads, it's going to automatically prompt us to open a blank project. I'll go ahead and click there. We get this initial screen, and I'll go ahead and maximize it for our screen here in the tutorial. And you should be seeing something like this. If for some reason you're using Project 2010, it's pretty similar. You might not see the views bar on the left. You can actually show that in the view pane, the view tab in 2010. But by default, 2013 looks like this. You'll see that we're on the Gantt chart view, and we've got the Gantt chart open. On the front left here, we can see what we call the task list. It's sort of a task spreadsheet. And on the right is a blank chart space that becomes our Gantt chart. Gantt chart is probably the most used technique in project management. We're going to go ahead and start adding in information about the project, and as we do that, we're going to navigate around this interface. The scenario here is that we've been asked to set up and analyze a new wine brand for Walmart. And other people in our company, our boss included, really don't know how to do project analysis. They've asked us to step in and do it. We've already interviewed a bunch of our colleagues and collected information about the tasks that would be required, who would need to do them, and so we're going to be able to use that information. If you don't have a blank project open, you would go back to File, New, Blank Project, and open one up. Hopefully everyone is right here at this point. Of course, you can pause the video if need be. Okay, I'm going to save it. I'm going to follow the instructions in the guide. So here we are putting the name for the file. I'm going to save it on the desktop. I'm on slide 7. I'm going to put my last name in all capital letters and then underscore New Wine Brand 1. Please be sure to use this naming convention when you turn in your file. It helps us keep track of all the files during the grading. We're going to go to the Project tab, and I'm going to click on Project Information and set the start date. What this does is it tells Microsoft Project the earliest time it can begin the work. So I'll scroll to 2015. Walmart wants this new wine brand for the next year's holiday season, and I'll hit OK. And that'll save it. And you'll see that it'll update some information inside of the project momentarily. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is change the working time. Turns out at our company we don't work on St. Patrick's Day, so I need to go to March of 2015 and select out March 17th. This is the standard calendar inside of Microsoft Project. Now what that means is, by default, Microsoft Project has a calendar built in to tell when it can allocate work and when it can't. So we're setting an exception on St. Patrick's Day in the standard calendar. By default, it only allows working from 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. So if there are holidays, you need to make sure they're set as non-working and grayed out so that you get more accurate estimates of when things can get done. And that's exactly what we're doing right here. In a larger company, this actually could be a standard enterprise calendar that automatically connects into your Microsoft project. Another thing I'm doing here is changing new tasks to be auto-scheduled. I'm also going through slide 10 and making sure the defaults in this screen for changing the working time and the options are all okay. And they look okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit OK and save what I've done as a change. Now if you don't add that in, notice too the auto-scheduled is now changed in the bottom. I could have changed tasks to be auto-scheduled here in the bottom left, but we did it in the change working time screen instead. One of the things that auto-scheduled is going to do for us is it's going to allow us to automatically have our tasks calculate durations and their relationships. Every time we save them, it's going to automatically make those calculations, which we're going to see in a minute. Okay, now next thing we're going to do is we're going to scroll around and start entering some of the information that we have gathered. We turn on our project summary task in the Format tab. You can see that that then gives us a little bit of information. Project's already trying to figure out how long our project is, and it places the summary in this summary task. A lot of people don't know that summary task is there. It's very handy for the kinds of things we're doing right now, trying to make an estimate. I'm going to go ahead and type in all of these tasks. I'm putting them in with a little bit of a shortened name. You can see on slide number 13 that there's a little bit more detail actually I could write. I'd be working from my notes from interviewing my colleagues. There might be a whole lot of information about each of these different tasks actually. In a moment we're going to also add in a note on one of our tasks. That's the place where you could keep some of that extra information about the tasks. One of the tricky problems when you're working to define a project in the very beginning is figuring out exactly what is a task and what is a caveat to that task or a condition. Sometimes that's not clear, and sometimes you need to put a task in to check to make sure a condition is met. So it becomes a little bit tricky, trickier than it may seem at first to get this data into a clean format like we have here. In a moment you'll see that we realize that the inspect and complete batch task actually includes licensing, but let's just assume we make a mistake right now and add a task that shouldn't be there. So we'll put licensing as a separate task right now. Okay, I've now got it. I see in the Gantt chart that little bars are beginning to show up. It's starting to make my Gantt chart for me. As we add more data, that's going to look a little more interesting and graphical. Another thing that we see on slide 14 is that we can add a note. So I'm going to go ahead and go down to Filter and Pack. And we heard during our interviewing that we need to use our new green bottle design. So I'm going to click on the Notes tab and I'm going to write that note here. As I save that, you notice the little sticky note icon shows up. Now anybody who has access to this project plan, if it were on a shared drive for example, has this little sticky and realizes there's some important detail about this task that needs to be considered when doing the task. Gives us a better chance of actually being sure that the task is completed correctly. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add predecessor information. I'm dragging the divider over so that we can see the predecessor column clearly. Now what happens here is some tasks have to be done before the next task can begin. So we happen to know from our interviews that task 3 requires task 2 to be done first. So I'll go ahead and type a 2. When I do that, I see this little line connecting the two tasks telling me that this relationship is now acknowledged in the Gantt chart. I'm going to go ahead and add in the rest of the information, taking it directly from slide number 16, and as I do that, we're seeing the Gantt chart begin to build itself. The next thing I need to think about is how the summary tasks work. So we happen to know that we have some summary tasks like setup, production, run. Now there are a couple of ways that you can indicate a summary task. Right now, setup, production, run is sitting on the bar there starting on March 1st, and it looks like a normal task. Well, I actually need to change that. So I'm looking through the different tabs at the top. We started on this Format tab. I need to go back over to the Task tab, and that's going to allow me to indent. If for some reason you can't see your tabs, that's because they haven't been pinned, and you're going to have to click up here in the tabs in order to see the different options available to you. When you go to the Task tab, you're going to see the little indent arrow right there. And that's how you create a summary task. By this indentation, you can do it with the Alt-Shift-Right key as well. We'll do that first. So I'm going to go ahead and select the task that needs to be part of a summary. And that turns out it's going to be tasks 2 and 3. Are subtasks of setup, production, run. I hit the Alt-Shift-Right arrow and they indent, and I can see in the Gantt chart that the icon has changed for setup, production, run. I'm going to go ahead. I can see that tasks 5 through 8 are part of ferment batch. I'm going to go ahead and select them. This time I'm going to go up and click that right indent arrow. Oops, I lied. I used the keyboard shortcut. That's a lot faster for me, so I tend to use it. Let me pin this and then I can do it for you on this next one. So let's go back, and this time for this next one, tasks 10 through 14 need to be indented, and I can do it with the icon here. Now at this point my Gantt chart is looking pretty clean. I've got some interesting detail. I can see stages to the project and when they begin, and that's beginning to be helpful for me as I begin to understand how this project is going to work. I've just noticed that the licensing task is not actually there. I'm going to correct that in a minute. If I go to the tracking Gantt, I can get a little more information. I'm going to right-click on the timeline and zoom the timescale to the entire project. And when I do that, the tracking Gantt now shows me the critical path of this project. That's this red line. Microsoft Project is trying to figure out which tasks actually determine how quickly this work can get done. And by default, this critical path is telling us why Microsoft Project thinks 7 days are required at this point. Of course, we're going to add more detail later, but this is one of the immediate values that comes out of using a tool like Microsoft Project. All right, let's go add resources. I clicked on the Resource tab, and then I opened the Resource Sheet view. Now, if you missed that, you can scroll back. I'm going ahead and typing in the details from slide 21. I've got my different individual people, my resources, and I'm making sure to type in their initials as 2 digits. The reason I'm doing that is that Microsoft Project by default will just take the first letter and it won't make sure that they're unique. And I want them to be unique because I'm going to use that later on. Another thing I'm doing here is adding in a grouping for each of my resources. So for example, if you have some people who are in the business side of the project and some are in the technical content side, then you might split them into two different groups, and that's what we have here. So we've got R1 is our first group of resources and R2 is our second. Because we're splitting them, later on in the exercises, when we get to exercise C, we're going to be able to know how many hours each type of resource is needed and how much it's going to cost us by resource pool. Once I get all of this data put in about their basic names and resource types, I'm going to come back and add their price information. Something that we can also see as we enter this information is that Microsoft Project by default will make new resources work resources. Now for people, that's the right type of resource. We're going to talk more about resource types later in further exercises, but for this exercise we're going to keep it pretty simple. In this case, our employees are actually salaried at the company where we work, and so we don't really have overtime rates. For the purpose of estimating the cost of this project, though, we've gone ahead and taken salary information and divided it by 2,000 hours, which is a standard work year, and that's given us these hourly rates that we're putting in for our employees. If we did have overtime rates, we would put the overtime rate into this OVT column. Another thing we see is that our employees are only working 100% here, which means we don't allow overtime. Another thing we see is that they're not forced to work somewhere else, which would mean under 100%. Both are possible. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to assign the different people to the tasks. So I go back to the Gantt chart. I've got this resource names column that I exposed by moving the divider over between the Gantt chart and the task list. I can see that in the task details pane that I can turn on over in the task tab details button, I can add resources here. So I know Arthur is doing task 2. I can type A and his name shows up. When I hit OK and hit next, I can add the people for the sterilize packing task. So there's Fred. Likewise, I could continue and add everybody this way, but I don't want to. I'm going to try another method. I can directly type in resource names in the resource names column. That's pretty good, and I don't mind doing that. If I double click, I can actually add people here too. So if I've got 2 people, I can add Fred, I can add Helmut. This is another way. Notice that because I added Fred completely and hit OK, it already set a cost for Fred, and there's nothing for Helmut and Mary. But if I save this task, because my tasks are auto-scheduled, it'll get recalculated. So I hit OK. Now if I come back and double-click again, notice that the price is now there, the cost for Helmut and Mary. Now as I add durations to tasks, that's going to change as well. Alright, and we'll just continue working down the list. One of my favorite ways to do this actually is to change the resource names column to the resource initials column. So let's right click and add column, insert column, and choose resource initials. Now this is quicker for me. We've set the initials correctly, so we can go ahead and do it this way. I know that I need, for filter and pack, I need helmet wiggle. I can type HW, then I can type a column, and then YP, and notice that their names show up in the resource names column. And likewise, I'm going to go ahead and add everybody else to their tasks. Now I'm just working my way down slide number 23 here. Now when we switch from the tracking Gantt back to the normal Gantt chart, we're actually going to see these names associated to the taskbars. We can customize the tracking Gantt to show that as well, but for now we're just going to let it be as is. We'll go back to the other Gantt chart in a minute and you'll see those task names show up like you can see in the PowerPoint. Aha! And here we discover once again that licensing is not actually supposed to be its own task, and so I'm going to right click and choose delete task. Now what's interesting is because I had this extra task, it's actually going to cause the calculation of durations to change a little bit, and later you're going to see that we're going to get 145 days instead of 108 in the duration. Alright, there's our Gantt chart. Sure enough, all the names are there. We're going to move over and take a look at the network diagram. I'm going to right click inside of the network diagram space and choose zoom. I could also go down to the bottom right, but here entire project. Notice in the bottom right there's a slider for zooming. And now I have a graphical view of the flow of the project. Again, the critical path is in red here, so I know which tasks are limiting the completion time. We haven't actually entered the durations yet for the tasks, so we need to go ahead and do that. Once we do that, it's going to change how this project looks, and it's going to be much more realistically. One thing I want to be sure you pay attention to is you don't set durations on the summary tasks. These, the ones that are bolded, never enter information directly into the summary tasks for duration. Those will automatically update as we enter other duration information. And notice, once we've put the duration information completely for the subtasks of a given summary task, the little question mark disappears too. Another thing I want to make you aware of is to be sure, double check to make sure the durations you entered stay. Microsoft Project will try to recalculate all kinds of different parameters as you enter duration information. Sometimes that will cause these durations to slip a little bit from where you entered. So you need to make sure that they come in and stay exactly as you wanted. You may have noticed earlier I had to switch test and augment back to 8 days when project changed it. Okay, now what I've got is a summary of the whole project. I can see that my tasks are actually set and that Microsoft Project is telling me we can get this done in 145 days. That's a little bit different than what we see in the PowerPoint. And the reason that it's different is that I've entered the data in a little bit different method, and I've deleted that licensing task at a little different stage than when the PowerPoint was made. In a moment we're going to go back and you'll see the 108 appear again, but if you've got 145 in front of you, then you're right at the right spot. Now the next thing that we can do moving forward is take a look at the types of task and understand a little bit about what Microsoft Project is doing in the calculations that are causing these different durations to happen. We're going to get more into this in some of the future exercises, but we need to start paying attention to it now. So we can choose any one of these tasks and double click on it, and that brings up the task information dialog box. Within the task information dialog box, first of all, under resources, I now have a summary of the cost of this task. That begins to be useful for budgeting. If I click on the Advanced tab, I start to see some other things. Is there a deadline for this task? It could be set here. What kind of task is it? This one by default is fixed units, which is to say that it's a certain amount of whatever our basic unit of time is. So in this case, days, so it's going to require 40 days of labor. This task is not set as effort-driven. If it's not set as effort-driven, then this task can't be sped up. So if we add more people to the task, then it doesn't think that we can actually make it go faster. Now, if I change it to fixed work, though, notice effort-driven by default changes. And now if I change the duration of the task, it's going to make a huge difference in how this task calculates. Now watch the summary at the top. We've got a bunch of issues showing up now. It's telling us that Fred can't work over 100%. I'm going to go ahead and skip all right here. What's happened in the background is that Microsoft Project is trying to make sure we told it no one can work over 100%, and it's saying it can't solve this problem as defined. Later we're going to learn about resource leveling. For now I'm going to hit skip all, and we see this little red man icon show up. We see our duration hit 108 days, but we also see, if I hover over that we've got somebody over-allocated. So I'm going to go ahead and switch the duration back to 100 days, or 40 days, sorry. And now we see that actually, without over-allocating Fred, or bringing in a temporary worker or somebody else, this project is going to take 145 days. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes in Microsoft Project to figure out these results that we're getting in this quick estimate that we're calculating. And if we had to do a lot of this work by hand, even in this simple example, it would take us a long time. Already we have some of the data we need in order to tell the boss, how long this project is going to take. We can see an end date. What we don't have yet is our cost information. So to get moving in that direction, let's set a baseline. I've clicked on the Project tab. I've got Set Baseline, Automatic. I hit OK. The baseline is the reporting comparison benchmark that Microsoft Project uses for some of the reports. You should get used to setting a baseline. When you get your basic details of a project together, go ahead and set a baseline. It allows you to roll back a project to a point in time if need be. It also allows you to compare progress from a given moment in time. The next thing I want to do is I want to show you where to find the cost information. Now we know that we can find it in a task information dialog box under resources. We can find a little bit of it if we look inside of the details pane of each individual task, but there's a much more useful way to find out how much this project is going to cost. It turns out that the specific cost information can be shown right where the task list is. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the details pane so it's not in the way. So if you go, there's this little unlabeled corner box up in the upper left of the data table, the task entry spreadsheet. I've right-clicked on it, and notice I can now choose the cost or summary or a variety of other data tables. These are really useful, and right now to answer the boss and colleagues' questions, I'll choose the cost table and I'll expand it out so that I can see the information here, total cost. Look at that. I now have information about how much this project is likely to cost us, so we can figure out our ROI. If I go to the summary table, I get a nice view. It tells me how many hours of work this is going to take, so we can get a good estimate of whether it's going to be way too much effort or not, or whether we're going to have to bring in new people. That pretty much gets us through the end of being able to present to the boss. Hopefully you're right here with me in exercise A. If I'm presenting this, I would copy and paste this data into a PowerPoint. We'd have a discussion and make a decision.
Okay, so what we're going to do next is I'm going to go back. We've worked through the first part of exercise A. But this time I'm actually going to go back and reopen the resulting document and do what we might do as a project manager, just review and look through to make sure everything is right. Now as we do that, you may have noticed there's some different variation between what I did in the video and what you get from following the PowerPoints exactly. So this file you're looking at now is a file that follows the PowerPoints exactly. Part of the difference happens because I did things a little bit in a different order in the video, and I have different weights set in my scheduling algorithm. So you see these little red guys over on the side here. That's Fred Iverson over-allocated. If I go over to Resource and I take a look under Resource Sheet, I actually see it. There's only one person over-allocated. Well, what's happening in this file is that it's marking every task where he's over-allocated or where he's allocated. And you can see him over here. And saying, well, we're not going to be able to, one of these has to move. Well, in the version you see on the video previous to this, I actually have taken my settings and told them to put all the over-allocation on the last thing scheduled to him, and so only one task showed up over-allocated. And that caused a little bit different scheduling, and it made a variation of about 34 days, 36 days in the end time. But there's really a bigger fish to fry here. So one of the things to do is when we get done putting this thing together, we might want to just get our Gantt chart, come over here, I'm going to right click, I'm going to zoom the time scale to the entire project so I can get a good look at the overall. And now I start looking at it, I start to see this little piece down here, assess the pricing and inspect, is happening on day one of the project. That doesn't look right. I've got a problem here. Well, let's get a closer look. I'm going to go across here and I'm going to get the tracking Gantt, because the tracking Gantt sometimes gives me a little clearer idea of where things are. And again, I'm going to zoom to the entire project. And I definitely have a problem here. Should I move it? Should I create a predecessor relationship? If I'm gonna get this project right, I need to make sure that things that need something else to finish before they begin are in the right sequence. And this doesn't look like it's working right. So another way I could pick that up, I could come across over here to the network diagram, and again, I see that there's this orphaned set of things, and the critical path is in fact part of the orphaned set here that aren't connected. So maybe they shouldn't be connected, maybe they should. Let's go back and think about it. In this case, I'm just going to logically go through. I'm thinking about we're going to make some wine. When we're going to clean and prepare the press, we're going to sterilize the packing and transport gear here. And we've decided that we can only do that after we do this. I'll leave that as it is. Mash and ferment the first test run. That means we have to have the sterilized, all this, etc. Because we're going to pack all of the mash in order to ferment it. Okay, that's good. Test and augment mash as necessary. Let me switch that. As necessary. I'm just error checking right now to make sure everything's right. So we can't really test the mash until we've already started it. So really this needs to be after that. Now notice all this blue. It's changing. Look at the days changing. As I change the predecessors, it's going to recalculate where everything goes. Notice Fred is no longer over-allocated. Here I've got this test and augment mash going. Filter and pack in bottles. Okay, so at this point we're going to wait until we've tested and augmented the mash, and then we're going to filter it and pack it, and then we can't actually ferment it and monitor it until we're done filtering it and packing it in bottles. It's going to sit in our storage for a while as it ferments. We can't label it until the fermentation is done because we don't want to disturb the bottles. So I'm going to go ahead and change that predecessor, and we don't really assess the pricing until after the label has come. And so here we're going to go ahead and say, you know, that's got a predecessor. Pack it in crates. We can do that after the labeling. That's all right. Inspect complete licensing. Looks okay. Load and ship. I think we're okay. Now what's happening now? Now all of a sudden our duration is 170 days. If I come over here and take a look, we're finishing at the end of October. We wanted this wine on the shelves for the holiday season. Looks like we're still fine. But now we've finally fixed it so that all the predecessors are right, and let's have a look at what it looks like now. So if I come across and pull it up, looks like we're okay. No orphans here. And it's possible in a project that you would have a piece that isn't sequentially interdependent. So what we've done is we've analyzed task interdependence to check it at the end and found a couple of mistakes and fixed them. And that's one of the more useful ways you can use Microsoft Project right off the bat to make sure things are done correctly. All right, that wraps up Exercise A.